Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gostola, and I'm joined by my co-host Rania Kalik. And welcome to the Unauthorized Disclosure Weekly Podcast. It's good to see you, Rania. And we have as our guest Micah, who is an organizer and writer based in Atlanta. And you might be familiar with all the excellent work and advocacy that you've done with the Stop Cop City movement. So thank you for joining us on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And it's a broad movement. Obviously, just as a disclaimer for you, which I know you could make yourself, but just obviously you aren't going to claim to represent everyone who's out there doing work in Atlanta. We're not having you on to like speak for the movement. We're having you on to speak about the movement to Stop Cop City. So I just wanted to do that in fairness because there's a lot of people on the ground that are doing amazing work, which I know you'll speak to today. But just to establish some of the issues for people and then throw it to you to give us some of the latest developments on the ground with the Stop Cop City movement. We've seen in the last week, 2 weeks, that the King Center has actually called on Atlanta to put the Cop City or Planned Public Safety Training Center up for a vote. We're going to be talking to you about the struggle around stopping this by putting it to a referendum, which we want to hear about from you. I know that the NAACP has in the past several weeks come out against it. You can clarify their position if you would like, but this puts Andre Dickens, who is a Black mayor, in a bind when it comes to the city of Atlanta. I know that an environmental group has sued to halt the Public Safety Training Center. This is a citizen lawsuit alleging that there will be runoff pollution. Again, we're talking about a lot of forest that would be bulldozed and raised so that they could construct this compound. And then you were calling attention, and others have been calling attention to the fact that there is a plan for another kind of a cop city or a cop training compound in another part of Georgia. Sandy Springs residents are raising new concerns over this possible $50 million police headquarters. I looked this up, and apparently this is where a few corporations have their headquarters, like UPS. And so they might have something to do with being involved and supportive of this. And then just to catch you up, these are some of the things that Mike has been writing, everyone. You called attention to the Georgia State Representative, Sarah Draper, who represents the Cop City area and is also a voting rights expert, apparently told constituents tonight she would not be taking a public stance or making a public statement on the Stop Cop City referendum. We've got Democrats in Atlanta trying to dismantle the right to have a ballot initiative at all, and our voting rights expert Democrats are refusing to take stances. And you can get into that because, we have as our backdrop what just happened in Ohio with the GOP being defeated by citizens. But that shows you how some of the Democrats are entrenched. And the last thing to get out there is just to say that while you all are organizing, they are hunkering down. They're becoming more entrenched in their views. And you pointed out that they passed a bill that would vastly expand surveillance in the city. It's essentially an ordinance that requires service stations to install video surveillance systems. And that ordinance basically has gone, will go into effect once there's some kind of implementation plan. So as you guys are saying, as everyone organizing from all different parts of the city to stop this, you have the city trying to put the entire population under more surveillance, under more policing. So I throw it to you, Micah, to give us your thoughts on where things are with this movement.
Yeah, tons going on. All of those things you mentioned. I think we're clearly at a point where the lines have really been drawn. You have the city council leaning more deeply into criminalization, into surveillance. That representative that I mentioned in that tweet, she responded and she said, "That's not what I said. I said that I didn't know yet whether I'd be making a statement." And I'm like, all right, this has been going on for 3 years and you don't know whether or not you're going to make a statement. How do you possibly defend that when Cop City is in your district? Like, that doesn't make it better. But yeah, so you have the city council and sort of the powerful institutions that run Atlanta on one side leaning deeper into this stuff, and then you have more and more people coming out on the other side saying, don't build Cop City, put it to a vote. The fact that, for years now, sort of the establishment has been telling us, it's not appropriate for people to be, burning construction equipment and, living in the forest and doing things the wrong way. You all need to do things the right way. And then, of course, that all comes crumbling down when you see this referendum effort get launched and people do things, through a very civic channel of saying, we're going to put it to a direct vote. Let's do direct democracy. And you still have the city trying to basically, stop this effort from moving forward in court. They're arguing that the referendum is invalid altogether. And so I think that, this sort of like respectability argument around which channels people should use when it comes to organizing, really just fall apart. And you have people even like the King Center and the NAACP seeing that and calling it out.
I want to take a step back for a moment because I mean, obviously, like Cop City sounds quite self explanatory, and it is what it sounds like. It's literally to build like this playground for police to come and practice all kinds of repressive techniques in. And I mean, not just in Atlanta, like, or not just for Atlanta police, not just for Georgia police, but this would be something that would be useful for like police countrywide. It's a place they can come and like practice this stuff. Can you break down for those who've maybe just like kind of heard of Cop City and the backdrop of things, but haven't been so focused on it? Like, why is this such a problem? I mean, there's so many angles you can come from, but like, let's say you're talking to someone who has no idea, like the severity of this.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, there's so many different pieces to pull together. Big picture, Cop City is a plan to take between 85 and 380 acres of forest land in Southeast Atlanta. This is critical forest land. It's been referred to as one of the four lungs of Atlanta by the city itself. And, it's critical for bringing down temperatures, cooling in the hot, summer heat, preventing flooding. And it's a plan to take that land, to raise that forest land, to destroy that forest, and replace it with basically a police militarization facility called Cop City that will cost between $90 and $120 million or maybe more. And it's referred to as Cop City because it includes plans for this basically mock city within it, this pretend city where police can simulate, real life urban encounters, urban warfare situations. And so, that's how sort of organizers gave the name Cop City. And on top of all of this, it's not even just the city of Atlanta building it. It's this private entity called the Atlanta Police Foundation, which is basically backed by this, wide number of corporations that fund this private entity to expand surveillance in the city. And it's the Atlanta Police Foundation that would actually be building this thing with public money and with private money. And so people have been fighting it because of, the environmental impacts, the policing and human rights impacts. There's been, no transparency around the entire process. You even have people who like don't necessarily care about policing or, the environment, but are just like good governance. Like this is a bad way to run things. And so it's really brought people together on so many different levels.
And then, of course, why don't you, just because everyone's attention is appropriately on these catastrophes that we're seeing related to the climate, why don't you describe, because you're getting into it as to what would happen with the loss of the forest, but perhaps you want to shed some light on the city of Atlanta and how they're doing in managing climate change and what city residents are up against and how important it is to not build this center so people can survive.
Yeah, I mean, just a couple days ago, we had heavy rain. And, people were posting pictures from all over the city with just like wild flooding. So, like, flooding is already happening. Like, we are already in climate disaster. And so, it's not even like this forest is going to solve climate disaster. It's just like we need everything we have to, prevent it from getting worse. And instead, they're going in the opposite direction. I mean, we've had record heat this summer. That's been true in a lot of places. And, about a week ago or so, they announced that they had one cooling center open for everybody. In August, they closed they closed the public pools. So all of these things that like would actually be beneficial, cooling centers, public pools, forests, during the summer heat, are being closed or torn down or offered in, such a limited capacity Meanwhile, and you know, is it about money? They can't hire, you know, enough lifeguards because students go back to school. Meanwhile, they're giving $67 million worth of public funding to Cop City. And so it's not that there isn't the money. It's not that you couldn't find people to hire. It's that it's not their priority. And so, you know, we're already seeing these various disasters, and they're only going to get worse, you know, if they move forward.
I want to ask you a bit more about the corporate funding of this, because an even higher percentage of the funding is actually coming from corporate funding versus even taxpayer dollars, though it's still lots of taxpayer dollars going to build a city for police to have a playground, in unstolen land, which is what's more American than that. But no, I mean, I'm curious, like, what's up with this corporate funding? Like, well, who's throwing money into this basket, and why?
Definitely. Yes. So the original plan, and there's actually a bit of a bait and switch here from this private entity, the Atlanta Police Foundation. The way that they sort of like sold it to the city council, the way that they had talked about it for years, was that the Atlanta Police Foundation would provide $60 million worth of private funding coming from all of these, you know, different private donors. So they have a ton of corporations on their board: Home Depot, Delta, Chick-fil-A, UPS, Bank of America, Chase, you know, all of these different sort of power player corporations are on their board. They give them funding. They get funding, you know, from a bunch of foundations to a lot of Atlanta-based foundations. The foundation for the corporation that owns our main media outlet in Atlanta has donated $10 million to Cop City. And so that has shaped the media coverage in Atlanta. And so that was sort of the promise, is that, you know, these private entities would put up $60 million and the public would pay $30 million. By the time the legislation for the funding actually came around, it turned out that what was written into legislation was not $30 million from the public, but $67 million from the public. And reporting from the Atlanta Community Press Collective showed that, you know, the mayor and their people actually knew all along that it was going to be way, way more than 30 million of public money. So, you know, assuming that it's still 60 million of private, we're now looking at potentially $127 million, you know, as a price tag for the facility, with all of these corporations behind it. But to be honest, like, I'm still skeptical that they'll even end up paying the full 60 million. I think that, you know, maybe more than anything, it was a bait and switch, but it's a sign of just, you know, how much power these corporations have in this city, and, you know, the influence that they have over city politics. Because Atlanta is, you know, totally a public-private partnership city. Corporations are involved in every part of how the city runs. The Atlanta Committee for Progress is this sort of like public-private partnership that has the mayor on it, and then also all these CEOs of various corporations. And they're really the ones who, you know, make the decisions about what's going to happen here.
All of you have all of these different organizers. You've gotten together. You put together this referendum action, and I want you to describe this, but I think it would be good for people to just get a flavor of some of the city's tactics. So I have this video. I just have like a minute clip of a local news media coverage that I want to put on the screen here and show.
Tonight at 6 o'clock, we just got our hands on a new court filing where the city of Atlanta says a referendum to stop the construction of a new public safety training center is what they're calling invalid. So this new filing is in response to several people in DeKalb County who were suing in an effort to put the training center up for vote. Now, the city says putting the issue on a ballot would essentially be pointless for two reasons here. First of all, because a referendum cannot repeal city ordinances. But even if it could, the city has already signed a lease, and a vote would not be able to cancel it. Opponents have started a petition to put the training center issue on the ballot. They need more than 70,000 signatures to make that happen.
So that just gives you a taste of what you all have been up against. So I'll let you speak to the issue of the city and the referendum.
Yeah, so big picture on the referendum. It was announced, so back on June 5th, 2023 of this year, the city council finally officially approved the 67 million in funding, despite there were literally over 14 hours of public comment from Atlanta residents who, you know, showed up and unanimously said, you know, we don't want this. There's so many better things we can, you know, put this money towards. Don't build Cop City. They approved it anyway. It was just a couple of days later that organizers announced this new effort, sort of within the broader constellation of, you know, organizing against Cop City. There's a lot of other things still happening too. But they announced this effort to have this referendum, to put it to a direct vote. In order to do so, it's this incredibly uphill battle where you have to gather basically 70,000 signatures in 60 days. And there were all of these limits on actually who could collect the signatures. So they were trying to, not let just anyone collect them. So the referendum team sued to basically say anyone should be able to collect signatures. It's a First Amendment violation to prevent that. And the city responded by saying, not only do we not want anyone to be able to collect signatures, but this entire referendum is invalid. In one of their recent filings in this same case, they basically came out and said, even if you get the 70,000 signatures, we will not put it on the ballot. We will not do it. And so it's this, really significant moment where, for people listening who are not in Georgia, you've certainly heard about how, important Democrats say Georgia is, as a battleground state in these national elections. Democrats need to win Georgia. Georgia holds the promise of the future. And, you've since 2018 and before and after, they talk about all of the voter suppression that Republicans are doing in Georgia, which is true. They just did another round of basically like purging people from the voter rolls. So it's absolutely true that there's this heinous voter suppression by Republicans here. And now Democrats are turning around and doing it to us in the biggest city in the state that they say is so important for elections. And so, I feel like a broken record a little bit, but I want to hammer home the point that it is Democrats who are trying to basically rule the entire referendum process invalid. That's a direct quote, invalid. They're saying that, it shouldn't be allowed to happen at all. And so, it's going to be a legal fight. I'm confident that we're going to get the signatures, and it's going to go to court. But just the fact that, they're paying this outside law firm, tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars to fight this effort is really telling about where their priorities are, especially because they're saying that this referendum can't cancel, an ordinance. The fact is, written into the lease that the city of Atlanta signed with the Atlanta Police Foundation, it allows the mayor of Atlanta to cancel the lease at any time. They just have to give notice. And so the mayor today could say, we're canceling the lease. There would be no penalties against the city. And so, they absolutely have the power to cancel this lease. It's just that they don't want to. And so, they're trying to make these legal arguments in order to get around it.
Well, so what happens once you do get the signatures? Then what? You said it goes to walk us through the process here of the, I guess, bureaucracy of what goes down next.
Right. So essentially, once the signatures are turned in, they've actually already, they're in the process of hiring a law firm to help with the signature validation process. So basically, their team, this law firm, is going to go through and try to throw out every possible signature, so that we don't have the required amount to get it on the ballot, because we're confident we will get it on the ballot and that we will have the correct number of signatures. I'm sure it'll be a legal fight over making sure it gets on the ballot. And then it would either go on, depending on the timing, it would either go on the November 2023 ballot or the March 2024 ballot. And that's what it would just, be a direct vote of, the people of Atlanta getting to decide, should this project move forward? But the reason they're so scared and the reason they're trying to cancel it is because they know that wouldn't go well for them. I mean, this campaign has already collected more signatures than the number of people who voted for Mayor Andre Dickens in 2021. And so, once you collect that many signatures, it's not looking good for Mayor Dickens. And so, that's why they're fighting so hard to stop it from going to a vote, because I think that they know that they would lose.
And in your view, just to get a sense of the politics, has this developed into a problem for Mayor Dickens? I don't know when he would be up for re-election, or if that's even in a plan, or if Andre has said, well, I'm just going to be mayor now, and then I'm going to step aside and let somebody come in because of how tough this fight has become. But is this getting to him in a way that it makes him vulnerable?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at sort of where his votes came from in the 2021 election, Southeast Atlanta was a major chunk of where he got his votes from. And that is like the closest area to Cop City. And, Southeast Atlanta is pissed over this. And so, he knows that it's going to threaten his chances. And, we heard from, people sort of inside City Hall that, his goal was really to just like have this over in the first year of his term. Like he didn't want it to be an issue. Instead, it's come to completely define his entire mayoral tenure, essentially. And, it's come to the point where you have, even these political commentators who normally comment on state level politics, the presidential elections, people like Greg Bluestein, which that name probably doesn't mean that much to anybody, but, he's writing columns saying, ooh, looks like this is really going to impact, his electoral prospects come 2025. So yeah, I think that, this has come to define, his term as mayor. And I would not be surprised if he was a one-term mayor because of this.
Jesus. I mean, it says so much about Democrats, honestly. Like, I guess I want to broaden the topic out for a moment. Kevin probably has like, I imagine, more questions about like the sort of internal stuff in Atlanta or Georgia specifically. But on a much like sort of countrywide scale, what does this say in the aftermath of years? I would say what the last like decade has seen several uprisings across the US against police violence and against the culture of policing. And it continues. I think, in fact, I don't know the exact numbers, but it's like the last couple of years, the number of police killings has actually risen across the country, which is really striking, especially after you had like one of the largest uprisings in our lifetimes, which was the George Floyd, in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd taking place, to have that number still going up. And I think that says is that nothing is changing. If anything, it could even possibly be getting worse. And then what is the building of this massive cop city infrastructure mean in the face of what I just described?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, Atlanta is part of, a pattern that's now being established of municipalities turning to, these massive facilities. So obviously Chicago, approved theirs 2017, 2019. And, that was a massive struggle with No Cop Academy organizers. It's happening here in Atlanta. These proposals for different iterations of cop cities, some, really similar, some, just massive training centers, to prepare for, the oncoming challenges of the 21st century. They're popping up all over the place. Pittsburgh, Hawaii, Texas. There's this huge National Guard expansion proposal, Camp Grayling in Michigan, that organizers are fighting there and have gotten some wins in. These facilities are popping up all over the place, even in the Atlanta metro area. Gwinnett County, Sandy Springs, and Fulton County all have expansions planned or completed of their training facilities, that amount to $50 million even. And so it's happening all over the place. And what I think it represents is really just an attempt, as climate disaster is here and worsens, and as people are taking to the streets and demanding a change to the status quo, it represents cities saying, we don't intend on changing the status quo of mass racialized inequality and police brutality, and so we are going to attempt to lock down our cities, with these massive police forces that have all of these tools at their disposal, in order to better control for the outcomes of an increasingly unstable world. And so I think that that's one of the main reasons you're seeing these proposals. In 2020, people took to the streets across the country. People took to the streets in Atlanta. They smashed windows of these corporations that run the city. They burned cop cars. They really took control for a minute there. And I think that that's when these plans really took off in Atlanta, and they said, oh shoot, like we've got to do something different. We've got to lock down this city. And that's why you see, not just Cop City in Atlanta, but they're also trying to build a new $2 billion jail. We're already the most surveilled country or city in the country. And, now they're passing this legislation to create more surveillance cameras. And so I think it's really, this lockdown strategy of, we are going to turn whatever our police state already is into this like hyper mass surveillance police state, everyone's seen and controlled at every time.
That's a good segue into what I wanted you to address, which is this interplay that has existed between the city of Atlanta and then Republican Governor Brian Kemp, because from the very beginning, a lot of the focus has been, rightfully so, on the extreme nature of the state of Georgia and the way that people organizing to stop Cop City have been labeled essentially domestic terrorists by virtue of the actual law that is being invoked against them to try and neutralize and suppress the movement. The way in which police have gone about, basically fabricating charges and allegations against people to make them seem like they were prone to violence. It's all part of the history of organizing in this country for decades. And so it fits into a police tradition, so to speak. But that said, what we've really observed, and I'm sure, and I'd like to hear you speak about, is what Andre Dickens and other Democrats in the city have done to basically show that they're complicit or they accept what the city, what the state of Georgia has done. Like the opposition to treating these people as domestic terrorists, treating your friends, your comrades, people who are on the ground organizing as domestic terrorists. They really haven't been that strong in opposing the state of Georgia, it would seem.
Yeah, and not only have they not been that strong, but it was the Atlanta Police Department who I first am aware of that called forest defenders terrorists. I actually think that this is a designation that emerged locally, as far as I'm aware of. It was Andre Dickens, and it was the police chief, and it was this sham community engagement board that they created to pretend like the community wants this thing. I think they were the first ones to use this terrorist designation. And when a joint police task force marched into the forest in January 2023 and murdered a forest defender in cold blood, that was the local Atlanta police and the state police and the federal, that was, it's been thoroughly bipartisan from the very beginning. And you have Andre Dickens out here, like affirming these charges and saying, whatever they need to do to get these criminals out of here is, I'm in favor of it. It's even, there's the DeKalb County District Attorney for a long time was also prosecuting these cases. She finally just pulled off of them due to the amount of pressure. And so now the state attorney general is, really taking the lead on them. But it's also still the Fulton County District Attorney, who everyone is talking about for prosecuting Trump, who is also prosecuting some of these domestic terrorism cases. And so it just kills me when I see people praising Fani Willis for, going after Trump, when she's also, she was the same prosecutor who went after mostly Black Atlanta public school teachers using the RICO statute to put them in prison, about a decade ago. Same person, using these domestic terrorism charges, she'll throw a RICO at anything that breathes. And so, it's from the top to the bottom, like a deeply bipartisan affair when it comes to trying to, criminalize and, at times even literally assassinate people in the movement.
Yeah, I mean, not to sit here and overly praise anybody in positions of power, but I am curious. I mean, given that a lot of people have been huge disappointments when it comes to allying with the actual community for this, is there anybody locally, statewide, on a national level who has been speaking out against Cop City? Okay, you're nodding, so maybe there is someone. I'm like, please tell me there's at least one person. And I'm also curious, if there are plans to get, or if it's been attempted already to perhaps get, it just seems like an issue that members of, for example, the so-called squad, an issue that they might be willing to speak out on, though I don't know how much it matters if people in Congress speaking about something that's local, but still. Is there anyone we can praise as an ally on this?
Praise is tough. I would say
Okay.
there are 4 council members who voted against the funding for the 67 million in funding for Cop City. And so that, that matters. It matters to have that on the record. I'm, appreciative of those council members for doing that. I would say no council member has taken it up as their issue and has really treated it with the urgency that it deserves. I would say Councilmember Liliana Bakhtiari has been most outspoken about their sort of opposition to it. But, looking at, our elected officials, no real champion, no one who is, consistently, out there keeping, saying that this should not be built, really holding a firm line. And so it's, and that's certainly true at the state level where, again, even if a lot of these Democrats, that they wouldn't care about policing, you would think that maybe some of them would make a statement about, the city's attempts to, overrun this referendum effort, since they all talk about voting rights all the time. They all wanted to talk about when those, state legislators were like unceremoniously removed from their positions. They love to talk about things that happen in other states, and then, they don't make any mention of it here. At the federal level, some squad members have made statements. Marianne Williamson, funnily enough, I know she's not elected, but she's been speaking out quite a bit around Cop City. And then, yeah, our senators have been all but entirely useless. Warnock and Ossoff, who need votes of the voters in Atlanta, and especially DeKalb County, where this thing is being built. Every 4 years during the presidential elections, you hear how important DeKalb County is, to winning Democrats the election. And it's DeKalb where this is happening, and our senators are completely silent. And they are just not going to get the support in their upcoming elections from people. Probably a lot of people will still vote. Will young people vote? I don't know. But I know so many people who used to volunteer for the Democratic Party who are now actively organizing in Cop City. And they're like, I will never volunteer to get these useless Democrats elected again, because look at how they're treating us. Like Lorraine Fontana, 76-year-old, longtime activist in Atlanta. There are pictures of her out there holding signs, canvassing, getting out the vote for Warnock, Ossoff, Biden. She was arrested outside of Home Depot earlier this summer for the most peaceful of protests. She was arrested outside for criminal trespass. She had been reading a statement about Home Depot's involvement in Cop City. And APD arrested her and took her to the notoriously violent Fulton County Jail. And she was someone who had helped get out the vote for Democrats. And so, sorry, this is now beyond your question. Ossoff and Warnock.
No, let it out.
Yeah. You've got a lot to say. Have made the most lackluster statements around, when they have said something, they're like, we don't like the violence of the protests, and it's like, what violence? And then they're like, but we also hope everyone will be in dialogue together. It's just it's so pathetic.
Yes.
And so useless.
I mean, I'm about to say something that's maybe a little too far, but it's just so wild to me that there continues to be this ridiculous emphasis on protesters are burning things, and they're taking space, and they're just protesting the wrong way. And it's against a facility that teaches people how to repress and murder better. How are you supposed to respond to that? You want me to throw and it's like no one's even obviously doing anything violent, but it's like, do you want me to throw flowers at you and not shout at you?
Yes,
it's kind of stunning.
It is, and I think this is 100%. And this is the thing where basically every accusation they throw against the movement is actually just a reflection of what they themselves are doing. So, they talk about, violence, and people are engaged in militant direct action. A lot of construction equipment has been burned. People are making clear that this is a fight for our lives. This is a fight for the future of Atlanta. This is a fight for the future of the country. So people are going to burn your equipment if you try to come in and destroy one of the 4 lungs of Atlanta. And so yes, people are militant. No individual has been hurt. The only side that has a body count right now is their side. They murdered somebody, right? They put 42 people in jail on domestic terrorism charges that carry 35-year sentences. It is their side that has treated this movement with so much violence. Another one, the outside agitator narrative. They talk about, it's just white anarchists from out of town who care about Cop City. First of all, that's not true. But second of all, if you want to talk about the outside agitators, there's been this amazing research, Mapping Atlanta, put out, basically showing where the funders of Cop City, none of them are close to the site. Many of them are outside of Atlanta altogether. Just recently, it's been making the rounds on Twitter. The Atlanta Police Department is doing all of these recruiting sessions in cities across the country. So you talk about outside agitators, who's coming in to do violence against our communities? It's the police recruiting people to come, be violence workers in Atlanta. And so, yeah, just every accusation they throw at the movement is just something that they're doing themselves, and
Yeah.
we see it time and again.
Yeah, that's practically recruiting for like a military occupation of a major American
Yeah,
city, so that they could, the cop city effectively becomes a military base for your own community. So I do just want to mention, because Rania asked it, um, eh, it's not a leader. I don't know what kind of cachet they have in Atlanta, but I'm familiar with this group because they've always been closely aligned with Democratic Party issues. And I saw that Color of Change came out in against Cop City. Again, I don't know how far it's going to go, but the fact that this group that normally would follow what Democrats are doing has spoken out against Andre Dickens, it might say something. Again, he was up. This group's upset that there is this attitude of trying to suppress the referendum that is being organized. I mean, they're not like necessarily saying they're against Cop City, but they're saying that they're against Andre Dickens obstructing democracy. But anyways, let's put that off to the side. I
yeah.
would like to
I'll just
have
say real
you.
quickly that
Yeah.
that actually in Color of Change has actually been pretty involved since near the beginning, taking a stance against Cop City. So they've actually been, pretty
Oh, okay,
good
that's
on
good.
this.
Thank you for clarifying. I didn't
Yes,
mean to
yes.
like make them
Although
sound worse.
no, not at all. Although I will say there's all these labor disputes happening there right now, so I don't want to give too much credit
Okay.
to the leadership. But yes, no, Color of Change has actually been pretty firmly against Cop City.
But before we wind down here, I'd like to, because we actually raised this on a prior episode. So just for the people who listen, it's good to come back to this. We had Steven Donziger on to talk with him, and we were talking about Jamie Marcicano. And I know that Jamie now has a lawsuit. And what's happened with Jamie is very emblematic of the way in which people who are not necessarily in Georgia but have come from different parts of the country, are like they're in school or whatever, but they've come down, they've shown their support, they've expressed solidarity. This goes back to that outside agitator narrative that has been deliberately fueled by authorities in Georgia to discredit the movement. And so Jamie was banned from campus in North Carolina. I believe it's University of North Carolina, law student, and had sued us. So I know that you are aware of all of this. Is something that people in Atlanta have attended to. Maybe you want to talk about this, and we can keep it broad. You can talk about Jamie individually, but also just what the authorities have done to make people fearful of coming in and showing support in a state where that's like the part of that's all part of civil rights history, like the freedom rides, right? Like coming down there and showing support for people and standing
Right.
shoulder to shoulder for voting rights. That's supposed to be part of the, I think it should be part of a democratic tradition in the state.
Yeah, and it's a tradition that, local Democrats love to claim when they're talking about our civil rights legacy, but not when they're talking about our civil rights present. Yeah, I mean, this has been one of their main points, in trying to sort of go after the movement, is casting it as outside agitators. And there's been some really specific ways that they've tried to manufacture that. And so, in March 2023, there was this night of mass arrests. 23 people were charged with domestic terrorism. But reports from the ground were saying that actually originally they detained about 40 people, and they let everyone who had Georgia licenses go. And they kept everyone who had out of state licenses in this very clear attempt to sort of manufacture this narrative that it's only outside agitators. And yeah, and I don't want to I don't want to act as if there aren't people coming in from out of town. There are people who have come in from out of town because Atlanta organizers have said, hey, y'all, this is an issue that impacts everyone everywhere. We need all hands on deck. We need support. We need solidarity. And so, we've called for people to come to the forest, to come to Atlanta. And so, there's been a really intentional ask in that sense. Yeah. Shoot, there was something else I wanted to say, but now I've lost it. Maybe I'll think of it.
Well, I mean, I guess I would want to ask, like, for those who maybe aren't in Atlanta but are watching this from afar, and they're like, this is horrifying because obviously this goes way beyond Atlanta, right? From everything we've talked about, this really will impact the entire country in so many ways, in various ways. What can people do to help, to get involved, I mean, also, and for people who are in Atlanta, if we happen to have an audience there that's watching who doesn't already know. So both of those things.
Yes.
What are the various ways people can get involved in pushing back against the building of this cop city?
Yes, absolutely. And I remember what I was going to say is, you know, there was a journalist, I think from Truth Out, who on the night of those mass arrests was told by a cop, you know, it's a felony to cross state lines to protest, right? And so, you know, of course, cops always lie, but like they are actively, you know, basically through these charges, they're trying to make it so that no one is willing to come to Atlanta, that people in Atlanta are not willing to be a part of the movement. You know, it's an active, I think they know that a lot of these charges aren't going to stick because they're completely bogus. They're, you know, pure political prosecutions, but they're trying to scare everyone off. Okay, that's what I was going to say. But how can people support? You know, there's so many ways, you know, that range from, you know, you can donate to groups like the Atlanta Solidarity Fund. That's, you know, the organization that's providing a lot of legal support and does a lot of bail support, you know, for folks who are criminalized. You can donate to the referendum campaign at copcityvote.com. You know, there are weeks of actions that are hosted, you know, throughout the year. There's been 6 since the beginning of the movement, and there's often a call for people to, you know, come to Atlanta and to, you know, participate in the activities of that week. And so you can, you know, I think defendtheatlantaforest.org or .com, you know, always has information on what's happening. There are often, there are ways to volunteer with the referendum. So we need people to phone bank and make sure that, you know, everyone who can sign the petition has signed the petition. Again, copcityvote.com. And I mean, also, you know, you can find out what's going on in your city if there's a similar proposal. You know, people have held solidarity rallies across the country. StopCopCitySolidarity.org has basically a map of where, of different locations of all of the financial backers and the contractors of Cop City, which are all over the country. So people have had protests outside of, you know, various facilities for these contractors and funders. So there's really a ton of ways to be involved, including just, you know, spreading the word and, you know, getting the word out. You know, people are flyering here all the time, but you can, you know, spread the word wherever you are. So we appreciate and love any and all solidarity.
So just one clarification before we say goodbye. Thank you for joining us on the show. You mentioned the Atlanta Solidarity Fund. I know they were raided. So are they in a position to still accept donations, or like is there anything complicated to that, or is everything still okay for them to take those donations?
Yeah, so yeah, the Atlanta Solidarity Fund, which is a bail fund, was raided in late May 2023, and they were charged with these bogus financial crimes. And so for a minute there, the National Bail Fund Network was accepting donations on behalf of the Solidarity Fund, but now the Solidarity Fund is, I think, back up and operational and can accept donations. So yeah, not being kept down by the oppression.
But they still face criminal cases? Are they still or were those dropped? They weren't dropped.
Yeah, still pending.
Okay. Well, thank you, Micah. We really appreciate your time, and we'll obviously stay on top of what's going on with this movement. And it certainly, though I don't want to declare premature victory, but it certainly looks like there's some momentum on the ground here, that you do have some elites scrambling and trying to figure out what they can do. I think they're on their back feet. I don't know if you're going to prevail, if the movement will prevail, but it does seem like this is a really good moment for people to join, because a lot of the hard work that has already been done over the 3 years is now paying off with something, you know, tangible being shown, that you do have all of this massive support for stopping this from happening in Atlanta. So it's really proud. I'm really proud. And I think it's inspirational to everyone around the country that sees how easy it is for these corporations and the public-private partnerships to defeat us. That, you know, although there's a lot of sacrifices that have been made, that if people struggle, you know, there is this chance of overcoming.
Definitely.